And then let me get the share screen up. As always, let me know if y'all see this. While I get the PowerPoint up.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. All right, there we go. Let me get my laser pointer. Yeah, I get that. All right. So good morning to everybody. Today's lesson is the book of Esther explained. And this lesson title, this topic is Queen Esther. So I want to dive in to the character of Queen Esther and talk a lot about her and a lot about, the way she's operating within the story, and to kind of make sense of it. So when you reread the book of Esther on your own and you read through all these events and everything that's happening, you can kind of understand how Esther plays her part and how big of a role. Well, of course, the book is named after her, so of course she has the biggest role. But understand, her way of thinking and how she gets through these situations. So I kind of wanted to do a big character analysis of her, and then next week we'll finish off with the edict itself. And I think that will probably be the end of our Esther series. Would be next week when we talk about the edict and everything and the law that was written against the Jews and how they were able to counter it so they could survive. But let's start off with who is Esther. Let's go to the book of Esther. Let's go to Esther chapter 2, verse 7. And we're going to read verse 7, then we'll skip down to 7 and 18. But Esther chapter 2, verse 7. And it reads, Mordecai had a cousin named Esther. Well, had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. So we already know this before, that Esther is the cousin of Mordecai, and she was adopted by him because her parents had passed away already. So she was an orphan, and Mordecai took her under his wing and raised her as his own daughter. Let's skip down to 17 and 18. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a banquet, a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. So Esther, of course, is the cousin of Mordecai, and she is the wife to King Xerxes. We believe that King Xerxes in history is the husband of Esther. The Persian name, the name we get in the Bible is different, but we try to identify him as Xerxes, as we know as Xerxes the first, in the history books outside of the Bible. And she, of course, is the queen of Persia. So she's a very powerful lady. She's the queen. She's the highest position. She's the queen of a empire. So she's in a very important position. She's not a average person. She is a person with power and a lot of responsibilities. She's the queen of the Persian Empire. Now let's go into her character. There's some things, and when you read through on your own, you may pick up more, or you may have a difference of opinion on her character. But these are three things I think is very vital to her character for her moving through the story. First is she was very attractive, right? She is selected to be the queen of Persia because of her looks. The king wanted to have as many attractive women as possible, and she was very attractive. But she's not just attractive in terms of her physical beauty. She's also attractive in terms of her character. People are drawn to Esther, and you're gonna see that throughout the Bible. When recent verses talking about how she won people's favor. She's a very attractive person, both physically, but also a person that draws a lot of people to her. They like how she is. She's a likable person. She's very clever, And we're going to see that too as we go through along. She is a person that is very intelligent. She makes, you know, very intelligent moves, and she's very clever. And she's also politically astute. She is a person that's very aware of the things that are happening, and she makes political moves to save herself and also save her people. So I think a lot of people overlook this about Esther. We kind of think of Esther just kind of, going through this situation. Uh, just things are just happening to her, but it's kind of different when you really read it. Esther is somebody that knows what she's doing. She is a very intelligent individual, and she's somebody that makes moves, to put her in a better position. She's not things are not just happening. She's not helpless at all. She is very much a political player, as she needs to be throughout this story. So let's go to her attractiveness in the terms of her physical beauty, but also attracting people around her. One of the things you see throughout this book of Esther is that Esther has a lot of people helping her. It's not just Mordecai that helps her. Esther has one of the favor of many of the people, her female servants, and also the eunuchs of the harem also help her out a lot. So let's read a little bit about that. Esther chapter 2, verse 8 through 11. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susha and put under the care of Hege. Esther was also taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Hege, who had charge of the harem. And Hege is pretty much will be the head eunuch of the harem. Verse 9. She pleased him and won his favor. Immediately, he provided her with beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 female attendants, selected from the king's palace, and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. And let's skip to verse 15. When the turn came for Esther, the young woman Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Hege, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. So an important thing to understand about when Queen Esther was initially taken to the harem and she was selected to be queen, she had a lot of help from the head eunuch named Hege. It says, the Bible says that she found favor with him. He gave her special treatments, special beauty treatments, whatever their standard was at that time. He gave her special food. So Hege liked Esther so much, it seems that he assisted in helping her become queen. He gave her advantages over the other women of the harem. And Esther, just because of her character, she also won over the servants of the palace in general. So Hege was on her side, but also it says she won the favor of everybody around her. And this is not surprising when you think of the Bible. When you look at many instances of the heroes of faith, many of the Bible characters, a lot of the people, no matter what the situation was, usually were, when God was working through them, they would become attractive to people. People would give them responsibilities. People were drawn to them. One example would be Joseph, right? Joseph, if you're familiar with the story of Joseph and his coat of many colors, sold into slavery, right? He's a slave, but he becomes popular with his master, becomes the head of the master's household. He's lied on, thrown in jail, but even in jail, he becomes very popular, right? Because God was allowing people to show favor on him, and he becomes the head of the jail. And then when he gets out of jail, he becomes the second in command of Egypt, right? So you see there's a trend with people who are close to God. God allows people to he allows them to have favor among people, and people are attracted to him. And I think Esther is kind of the same way. She's a person that naturally draws people to her, and that's very important for her. And the reason for that, I think that's very significant for the story, is because when you look at the harem, for those of you that don't know, the harem is pretty much like the dwellings of the king's wives or mistresses. It's usually very isolated, somewhere in a palace, and these women are kind of isolated, from the outside world, right? Because it's the king's wives, his mistresses. He doesn't want anybody messing with them, or anybody messing with his lineage, because if they're his wives and they're giving birth to his children, he doesn't want anybody coming in there, compromising the royal line. So the harem is usually very somewhat isolated, and these women are usually protected by eunuchs, which are men who can't perform anymore because something was done to their manhood to avoid that. So but because Esther has a good relationship with the eunuchs and with the people of the palace, she can communicate on a regular basis with Mordecai, because it says Mordecai checks on her on a regular basis. But remember, Mordecai, their relationship is not known at first. Esther hides her nationality, and the scriptures say that nobody knows that they're related at the time. So they're mostly communicating mostly through the eunuch. So he's not seeing her in person, but he's probably communicating to her with the servants, as he does with the edict. When he finds out the edict, he sends a message through one of the eunuchs, and he sends it to Esther. So they're able to communicate because Esther has a good relationship with the people of the palace that allow them to communicate, and she's able to get information from the outside because people are drawn to her and want to help her out. But any comments about that on Esther's attractiveness? Does everybody get that? Is that straightforward enough? All right, let's go ahead and continue. Let's go to Esther's cleverness, and let's talk about her intelligence. Let's go Esther chapter 5, verses 1 through 8. And then we'll go to 11 and 12 afterwards. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, I'm butchering those words, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor. I'm sorry. Sorry, that was the wrong chapter. Esther 5. Sorry, Esther chapter 5, verses 1 through 8. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you." "If it pleases the king," Esther replied, "let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asked." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and request is this: if the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Now let's skip to 11 and 12. Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he elevated him above the other nobles and officials. "And that is not all," Haman added. "I'm the only person, Queen Esther, invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. So to give you the context of of this passage, this is after Haman has already put in motion for his plot to kill the Jews. Uh, Mordecai finds out about this. Then he tells Esther, and Esther decides to go see the king, even though she was not called for, which was very dangerous for her. But she goes to the king. The king holds out his scepter, and she's saved, and she starts a banquet. Right now, the funny thing is, Esther did not make a move on Haman at the first banquet, because there's multiple banquets, right? There's this banquet, and then it's the second banquet where she finally accuses Haman. But uh it shows that Esther allowed Haman to get comfortable, right? She didn't attack him immediately, because something you got to understand, that Haman is the second in command of the Persian Empire. Essentially, he's elevated higher than any of the other nobles. He's somebody that's very powerful, and Esther allows Haman to get comfortable and to get off his guard before she makes a move. She takes her time with calling Haman out. She doesn't do it immediately. She doesn't do the first at the first banquet, and there seems to be some time between that banquet and the other banquet, but she allows Haman to get comfortable, and she kind of puts him off his guard, and that shows her cleverness. She's not she's being very careful on how she moves. Let's go to Esther chapter 7, verse 1 through 6. So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Then the queen answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. So one thing I kind of noticed, and y'all can tell me if y'all see the same thing, but Esther kind of plays the long game, right? First, she allows Haman to get comfortable, invites him to multiple banquets. But then when she accuses him, she has separated him from his allies and friends. The banquet was a private banquet between just her, the king, and Haman. And Haman is, like I said, he's a very powerful man. He has friends at court. He has allies. He has, I don't know if he has armies. I'm assuming he has some kind of military with him. But Esther separates Haman from those allies. This is a private banquet. And then she accuses him when, he doesn't have backup. So she catches him off guard, and she catches him when he doesn't have any, away from his support, away from his wife and his friends, because he was meeting with his wife and his friends before this banquet, but then they take him to the banquet, and then this is when this happens. And it shows that Esther is a person who is who's very thoughtful what she's doing. She's very shrewd, she's wise, she's clever, and she puts Haman in a position where he can't defend his actions, because there's no defense for it, because he was trying to murder her people. And this is where he gets in trouble, and he kind of goes off the deep end and tries to beg her for his life. And the king takes it a different way. It was like, what, Haman, you got to go. You got to be punished for what you did. And that's when they impale Haman. So you see the cleverness of Esther. But any comments on that, or any questions on that? I hope everybody sees the cleverness of Esther. But any comments on that? Let's go to Esther chapter 8. And then now we'll get into the last part, showing Esther's political awareness. Let's go Esther chapter 8, and I actually have it here on the screen. Now, this is after Haman has been executed for his crimes against Queen Esther and her people. Verse 1. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. So we see here that, after Haman is defeated, the first thing is her husband, Xerxes, gives her the estate of Haman, and Esther in turn gives it to her cousin Mordecai. Now she has somebody that's related to her ally, her adopted father, and he is now has power. He's in charge of the state. So now she has a ally, with her at court. Now they don't have to go through the eunuchs anymore. Now she has a open ally with her at court. Somebody she's familiar with her. She has family with her. She also begs the king to put an end to the to the destruction of the Jews, because the edict had been put out where the enemies of the Jews were allowed to, under law, kill the Jews and execute them and plunder whatever they have. It was meant to exterminate the Jews. That was how bad Haman's plan was. Now, and we're going to talk a lot about the edict next week. We'll talk about specifically about the edict and how the Persian law worked at that time. But essentially, Esther comes up with a plan to give like a counter orders in order to save the Jewish people from the destruction. She comes up with a plan, and her and Mordecai work together to come up with a counter edict, a counter order, so the Jews are saved from the destruction that would have happened with just that original edict. So Esther 11, chapter 8, verse 11, and it's here. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. And then when we read further in the book of Esther, we see that's exactly what happens. When the day that came appointed, where the enemies of the Jews tried to kill them, the Jews had been able to prepare. They had armed themselves, and they were able to counter the enemies, whichever enemies they had. They were able to protect themselves, and they killed many of the enemies, including Haman's own sons, because Haman had, I think, at least 10 sons, and they were able to kill the 10 sons of Haman, their enemies. So, and then I think I forgot the number. It was a few hundred were killed in Susa, just the palace itself. Enemies of the Jews that tried to attack them. There was hundreds of them that died just in the city itself, in self-defense. The Jews defend themselves and kill their enemies, but these was all put in place by the political maneuvering of Queen Esther and the help of Mordecai, who wrote down exactly what orders to give the Jews so they could protect themselves. Let's go to Esther chapter 9, verse 11 through 13. And it reads here. Oh, actually, this actually has the number of the number I forgot. Esther chapter 9, verse 11 through 13. The number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king that same day. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king provinces? Now, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? It will also be granted." If it pleases the king, Esther answered, "Give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles." Now, another move by Esther was to repeat after the Jews successfully defended themselves from this edict. She also says, let us do something again tomorrow, and let us impale Haman's sons on poles. And she does it as a warning to her enemies, because if you remember, like we talked about, Haman versus Mordecai, how Haman wanted to impale Mordecai to impale Mordecai, and impaling was a way. It wasn't just about simply killing the enemy, but it was also to show a warning. You're displaying your power. You're saying, I can't be messed with. It is a way to show off, that you can't be messed with. And Esther chooses to do the same thing. It's not just about being cruel, or just to torture Haman's son just because of what Haman did, but it's about showing a warning to the enemies and saying the Jews can't be messed with. You said you can't mess with Queen Esther, you can't mess with Mordecai, you can't mess with the Jewish people in general. Otherwise, this is what happens to you. And so Esther proposes that because she wants to send the message that, our people are going to be protected. We can defend ourselves so that they are not messed with. Then we go to Esther chapter 9, verse 26 through 32. Therefore, and this is talking about the day that the Jews were supposed to be killed. Therefore, these days were called Purim, for the word pur. Because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what happened to them, the Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who joined them should without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. So they started to celebrate them escaping the destruction from this order from Haman. 28. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, in every province, in every city, and these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, a daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of Xerxes' kingdom, words of goodwill and assurance, to establish these days of Purim at their designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them. And as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to the times of their fasting and lamentation, Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim and was written down in their records. So after successfully, writing orders to counter the destruction of the Jews, after impaling Haman's sons on poles to show an example, to say, the Jews can't be messed with, Queen Esther also confirmed the celebration of Purim, which is a Jewish holiday, which they still celebrate today. She confirmed that to have a memorial for the Jews so they don't forget how close they were to destruction, but how they were saved out of it. And they kept it in their memory. And it's important to celebrate. It was very important for them to celebrate, to know, how close it could have been and how bad it could have been for the Jews, which is something we still do today, right? When we have something important event in our lives, or for a country or in a nation's history, we have celebrations for it, right? In America, we have Memorial Day, we have Martin Luther King Day, we keep things in our memory to make sure that it's observed, and we keep remind ourselves of how things could have been, or how bad they could have been in this direction. So as Queen Esther had a part in that, and her and Mordecai worked together to make sure the Jews remembered, you know, their enemies are out there and how it could have been bad for them. So, in conclusion, I think the important thing to understand about when you read the book of Esther is that understand Esther is a very clever individual. She's not a person that things are not just happening to her. She's making things happen. She's working with Mordecai. She has friends. She has people close to her. She is very much a person that is taking care of business, and she's instrumental in saving her people. And that's something I think is also important for us to understand about the Bible in general. When God works with somebody throughout the Bible, or when He appoints people to do certain tasks, it's very rarely that that person has no skills, right? God works with people that that put in work. He doesn't just give people powers to do whatever they want. He allows them to train themselves, allow them to become strong, become better, and then God gives that increase in order to save them out of whatever situation they're going to be in. It's kind of like how David faced Goliath, right? David, before he faced Goliath, had practice facing giants. He killed a bear, he killed a lion. He was a protector because he knew how to protect his father's sheep. God prepared David over time before. Then you get to the situation with Goliath, with the giant, where David's able to defeat him, but David was able to defeat Goliath because he had training before. And that's how God works with us, right? We got to put in the work. We have to improve ourselves. We have to become stronger, become wiser, and then God will give us the increase to become even better than what we're capable of our own. And I think you see that Queen Esther. This is a person who was thrown in a situation. She's thrown into a harem, but she makes the best of her situation, and she's able to become stronger, become a effective ruler, and she's able to save her people because of it. And that's something I want you to see when you read the book of Esther. But that's all I had today. Is there any comments or any questions or anything about this lesson?
Well done, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, well, we'll end it there.